Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. I've had a lot of viewers with Mosins pose an interesting question and an interesting problem and dilemma that they're currently facing. It seems to be what's happening is they're shooting their Mosin, and after they fire around, they open the bolt and they pull it back to cycle and pull out and eject that spent case, and then they want to load a new one. Well, what happens is when they pull back the bolt to eject the spent case, the bolt's supposed to stop here. See that? It's hitting the bolt stop. The issue that some of our viewers are having is when they're shooting it and they pull the bolt out, the bolt stop's not working and the bolt just flies. They just pull the bolt right out of the gun, which is really not what you want to do if you're trying to shoot your rifle and reload it quickly. So why does this happen? Why is it that when you pull the bolt out of some Mosins, it just pulls right out? It doesn't hit that stop like it's supposed to. Well, there's a couple of potential problems here. Now, if you want to test this out on your gun, and the first thing you want to do is obviously make sure it's clear, visual inspection. And I'm going to put my finger in there. Yep, we're clear. There's nothing in the magazine. And we're pointed in a safe direction. So we're good. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is if you're able to pull this out, first of all, with your fingers, you're going to want to take the trigger and push it forward this way. Normally, you pull the trigger, you want to push it forward as far as you possibly can. So while pushing it forward, see if you can pull the bolt out as far as you can. Now, if you're still able to pull the bolt out while doing this, chances are your bolt stop is probably just really worn down. That's one possibility. So this is our bolt stop here, which is on top of the trigger. So what's one potential issue is maybe it's just really, really worn, which is not typical. Even worn Mosins, this usually isn't an issue, but it's possible that your bolt stop is just really worn down. And even when it's all the way up, normal your triggers like that, it's just not protruding up far enough to hit this point right here, which is which this part of your bolt is what's going to make contact with your bolt stop. So that's one potential issue. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at that bolt stop, though. All right, so here we have our bolt stop. Now, some of y'all might be saying, no, Big Sam, that's not a bolt stop, that's the trigger. Well, you're right. Mosins are weird. In fact, the trigger actually is the bolt stop. This is the trigger. This right here, this protrusion, is the bolt stop. So as you can see, if this is like ground down or worn down, it's not going to be protruding up far enough to make proper contact with your bolt there. Kind of makes sense, right? That's really easy, but that's not typical. I don't really usually see that. Now, another problem could be that something is actually causing this to be lower than it should be. Now, one potential issue here is your trigger spring. So, put this through here. What's actually going to be the case is that your trigger spring goes through your trigger like that. So you have two things that are going to make contact with your bolt at one point or another. This is your bolt stop. This is your sear. So your bolt stop's going to hit right here. Your sear is obviously going to make contact right back here on the cocking piece. Your sear should not be a bolt hold open, i.e., when you pull the bolt back, either with the trigger not depressed or depressed, the sear should not be hitting the bolt at all. It's only when you go forward that it's really going to make that contact. When I say hitting the bolt, what I'm talking about is actually causing the bolt to stop. Now, why could that be a problem? Well, I've actually encountered one potential problematic case that maybe you're having this as well, where the trigger spring was actually bent like that. So it was like kind of like a U-shaped. Now that was bad because what ended up happening there was the actual sear was acting as the bolt hold open. And if that's your problem, well, you got bigger issues, because then you're actually going to have a really hard time. You're going to have to figure out a way to disassemble your gun in order to just to get the bolt out. So that's not going to be your problem, though, if you don't have any bolt hold open at all. But I bring this up to illustrate a point where your trigger spring here could actually be bent and causing your bolt hold open to sort of to be too low right here, essentially, right? So if you're still having the issue where you're pushing forward on your trigger like this, and you're still able to just pull the bolt out freely, then what I would do is I would disassemble the rifle, and I would remove this from the equation. So I would just pull out the screw that's holding this guy in, and then I would go ahead and put your trigger back in the receiver with just the pin there, without the trigger spring, and then try to push forward and see if then it'll act as a bolt hold open. If it still won't, then probably you're just going to want to get a new trigger. These are not that expensive, but chances are that little hump here is just not effective enough. Now, the other thing that also you can check is this really, really worn here on your connecting bar? But again, never really seen that before. But it's something else to check, because again, that's what's interfacing with your bolt hold open. So there's two potential issues there. Now, if that does, in fact, now act as a bolt hold open without having your trigger spring in there, that could mean your trigger spring is being a problem. Or another thing is sometimes the trigger actually can be kind of cattywampus, and it'll actually be dragging on the side of the stock. And sometimes there could be enough friction there, so it's good to, when the gun's unloaded and safe, kind of feel around and see if it's binding on anything. Because if it is, it can actually cause your trigger to stick in sort of this position, which again, when I have it in this position, it's going to be depressed, and there is no bolt hold open anymore. See that? So there could be an issue with something, your trigger binding against your stock, which is causing it to be kind of stuck in this position. And obviously if it's in this position, well, then you're going to have the issue of my bolt's just going to fall out. Just like that. Okay, so only a couple things to check. If this is happening to you, don't worry, it's not a big deal. Your gun isn't like broken or anything. It's probably just going to be either your trigger spring that needs to be replaced, or it could be that it's just binding up on your stock. Again, the best way to tell if it's binding on your stock is just to remove the stock and see if you're still having the issue or not with your bolt falling out. So hope you guys found this useful. Don't stress out too much if this is happening to you. Again, every Mosin's a little bit different, and you just got to go with the quirks. You don't never know what you're going to get. But that's why we love them so much, folks. These things have a ton of character. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know if y'all got any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.